You are watching the video version of the Marketing Should Be Fun podcast. We are so glad that you are here. If you prefer to listen to podcasts, you can find the Marketing Should Be Fun show on any of your favorite podcast platforms, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere else. But most of all, we're so glad you're here, and I hope that you enjoy today's conversation. Well, welcome back to another episode of Marketing Should Be Fun. My name is Austin Savage, and I'm not here with my co-host Kelsey today, but I am here with an incredible guest that I get to introduce you to. Today, I have Luke Waite with me. Luke is the founder and principal consultant of Pomelo Coffee Consulting and the Lev Co. His background is marked by turning inefficient cafes, cold brew companies, and coffee roasters that are in the red into highly efficient companies that are solidly in the black. He's also the host of the podcast, Good Folks Doing Good Work. We also went to college together, and so it's really fun to have you on the show today. Welcome, Luke.
Happy to be here. Thanks for giving me a moment to chat about life and business, and happy to be here.
All of the things, Luke. I feel like you and I, we knew of each other in college, and would I think we interacted maybe a few times. But it's been kind of cool because I feel like we have taken different, but it's like somewhat kind of parallel paths and journeys since the conclusion of that time of our lives. And so it's been really fun. I know we've interacted just a few times to catch up on business or talk about like potential partnerships and things like that. So it's just, I'm excited today to just get like a better understanding and feel for your journey and kind of what you've learned along the way too.
Yeah, I am too. I agree. It feels like we were always in sort of overlapping pools of people and even I'm sure some classes here and there. And I actually got to sit on your capstone presentation in school and was just impressed by your ability to pull all that together. And so I feel like we have always had these overlapping pieces of our lives, but never really had a chance to connect in this way. So I'm looking forward to chatting more seriously now.
I did not remember that you were at my capstone presentation, and I all of a sudden just got nervous because I'm like, I don't even know if I feel proud of that or not. So
I just remember I remember your presentation going well. I remember you well spoken, and I remember being like, wow, they've got their act together. And so that's all I can recall. But I do remember being there and being like, that's great.
That's fun. Well, thank you for attending it. I suppose that's super fun that you remember it. Fantastic. Well, we have a ton of stuff that I want to talk to you about. But we always start all of our episodes of Marketing Should Be Fun off typically with a this or that kind of segment that we call it. But I couldn't think of a good this or that. So I'm just going to ask you a question, and it's just going to be great. And it's a cheesy question because you're involved in the coffee world. And I know I could come up with some better questions. But it's what we got today, so we're going with it. So for you, what is your go-to either coffee order or method of brewing coffee during the summer specifically?
Ooh, during the summer. So I'm probably a weirdo. I drink hot coffee all year round.
Right there with you.
And
I love
it. So order at a cafe. If I've never been there, it's going to be a drip coffee and espresso. Gives you a good sense of whether or not they're dialed in and give you a sense of how they're approaching coffee. And then at home every morning I'm going to brew V60 for myself and my partners. So those are the orders in the cafe and then how we're brewing it at home.
That's so fun. When did you fall in love with like the V60 style or method?
Well, let's see. It would have been a couple of years ago. I'd say probably 4 or 5 years ago, and because I was using the Kalita Wave, and it was great. I wanted something that wasn't breakable, that I could just in the morning you're half awake. I don't want to be fumbling around with things that can break, and so I was using the Kalita, and it was great. And then I realized that there was a plastic V60.
Yeah.
And there was at the time there was some data that came out about heat retention and that it was better than ceramic or metal. And so I was like, all right, I'm just going to go ahead and buy this plastic V60. It's like $7. Yeah. And so I I think this was probably 4 years ago, and I just never turned back. I still have the Kalita, but
Hmm.
mostly use the V60. So yeah,
Yeah, that's so fun. I mean, I'm right there with you. I drink just hot black coffee anytime. It could be 100 degrees outside, and I'm just like, I will sit and drink a hot black coffee.
that's right.
I love it. My go-to still has been I typically switch between like the Chemex and the French press, but the Chemex is my favorite. I feel like it. I don't know. It's just kind of a nice. It's a nice sort of balanced brew for me. But should I learn? Like,
Yeah.
should I get the V60? Is that going to be better?
No, it's not like I always say that you should drink the coffee that you enjoy and the coffee you have
Hmm.
access to. And I have a Chemex as well. And if if I'm going to brew coffee for a couple of people, I'll definitely use
Yeah,
the Chemex. So my job isn't to convince anybody to like what I like. My job
for
is
sure.
to make people enjoy coffee in general, and whatever, however they can do that.
Yeah.
That's what I want folks to do.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Awesome. Well, Luke, I we hinted at this a little bit, but we went to school together and we've collaborated a little bit over the years. But I don't personally know really like what your journey looked like to launching the Levco, which I believe you launched with your partner originally, and kind of developed into Pomelo Coffee Consulting as well. So tell me a little bit about like just the journey, sort of what that looked like that just kind of
Yeah,
led to that interest and the launch of those
yeah.
organizations.
Yeah, well, in Bible school, I
Hmm.
was working as a pastor and just got totally burnt and really crispy, and it just
Yeah.
wasn't a good environment for me.
Hmm.
And we can go as far into that as you want, but basically
Yeah.
realized that ministry wasn't for me. And I was talking with my partner at the time, and she was like, "Well, what could you do that if you could do anything, what would you do? You could be in
Hmm.
any industry. What would you do right now?" And I think I was a junior in college at this point, and I was like,
Okay.
I really like coffee, and I had a good friend on that I had gone to school with as well that got me into it, and I was like, maybe I could be a barista, and so I ended up working as a barista for a while, and after being a pastor, and then moved from there into some education roles and some cafe management roles.
Yeah.
And it was sort of at this point, I worked for two companies at this point, and at both companies, there was just a lack of understanding for what we were doing uh, as it relates to folks that were serving us creatively. So, folks in social
Hmm.
media, designers, web developers,
Yeah.
we needed all of these assets and these projects done, and specifically in specialty coffee, uh, language is very important,
Yeah.
and they didn't understand what we were talking about, and they didn't understand our approach, and they didn't understand really the ethos of what we were trying to do.
Okay.
Good people, good designers. And so it was at this point I was like, I think there's a need here for an agency or a creative collective of folks that knows what's knows the industry, but also is really skilled on the creative side of things. And so that's when my partner and I started toying with the idea of maybe we start our own little agency. We had a bunch of
Hmm.
friends similar to yourself coming out of
Yeah.
school with all of these skills. And it was at that point that we started the Levco. And
Yeah.
just like I'm sure every agency owner out there, they started as a full service agency.
Oh,
And
100%. Yeah.
yeah, we could do it all. We had no idea what we were doing. And slowly over time, we started peeling back the onion of like, yeah, we actually don't know how to do this, or we shouldn't be doing
Yeah.
that, or we have no interest in doing this. And we started getting closer and closer to what we do now, which is truthfully, we're a strategy agency, and
Yeah.
the design is the implementation side of things.
Okay.
Um, and Pomelo, on the flip side of the coin, that developed later on. So opened the agency, was still working in coffee, purely a side project.
Hmm.
And then we COVID happened. I got sick with COVID for about a month. We're sitting in our apartment. We're like, we want to be in Chicago.
Yeah.
And as at that point, we bought a camper, traveled around the country, and then I went full time into the Levco.
Yeah.
Um, at the same time, roasters around the country had been asking me for help operationally with their roasters. And
Hmm.
after helping about three or four companies, I was like, I probably should get paid to do this.
Not
Uh,
just like, yeah, yeah, I'll help you for free. Yeah.
so it was at that time, this was about 3 years ago now, that I formed Pomelo.
Okay.
They're separate companies. The Levco is, like I said, a strategy firm that we do design work. And Pomelo, on the other hand, is a operations consulting firm. And what that really means is we just help coffee roasters make more money and optimize their systems and processes internally.
Yeah.
And so that's a brief view of the last 8, 9 years of my life and the development of both those companies.
For sure.
And yeah, yeah.
When did you learn? Because, like, you have kind of the creative sort of like, I mean, strategy isn't necessarily creative, but but it is kind of that sort of creative side of your brain into also this operation side of your brain. Like, was it pretty early on that you knew that you kind of had that brain for healthy operations and kind of processes like that? Or how did that develop for you?
So the second company I worked for, I they had opened their first cafe. They were wholesale roastery primarily, and when they opened their cafe, they essentially absorbed a space from another roaster that had occupied the space for a while,
Okay.
and it was a disaster. It was just
Yeah.
like it didn't make money. It
Hmm.
was there was no systems and processes internally. The team was really disheveled and not there was no vision ultimately.
Yeah.
And so I actually was about to leave. I was about to leave that company because I was like, I don't think I can be in this environment any longer. And from there, the week I was going to put in my notice, they offered me a management role,
Hmm.
and I essentially built the structure that they still use to this day
Yeah.
of how to operate their cafe and
Hmm.
how to train people, how to order, how to interact with guests, how to
Yeah.
clean and take care of your space. And we took that cafe from being like a complete and total disaster to actually being profitable in about 7 months.
Wow.
And from there, I got moved into an education role, which was more of an account management role. And I was just like, there's just like a lot of things. I got to see the back end of the roastery by being in
Hmm.
on the education side of things and not in the cafe. So from there, I started to see a bit more of the holes and gaps and needs for operational structure within roasteries.
Yeah.
And this is kind of in tandem with the start of the Levco. So it
Yeah.
was sort of that first like 4 or 5 years where I was getting purview into the behind the curtain of how things function operationally.
Yeah.
And then when I worked for two additional roasters after that one that I managed their cafe, um, and both of them, some of them have more structure than others, but
Yeah.
they really needed a lot of internal structure. And at that point, I was
Hmm.
like, all right, there's definitely a need here for developing some processes and some ways of
Yeah.
approaching our work.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things I do feel like, and Pomelo obviously started as like, oh, it's a coffee consulting company, this real like kind of focus on coffee. And I could be incorrect, but from my view, I feel like the Levco started out a little bit more general. Is that correct if I think about it that way?
Yeah, in the same way we started as a full service agency, the Levco was
Yeah,
like, who wants to work with us?
exactly. Because I
And
remember we collaborated on like a school supplies company. Like we were trying to like work together on,
yeah,
on pitching this,
oh
this
gosh,
company.
I forgot about that.
Yes, I think that's the first time we worked together, or just kind of even connected after college. And so I have really respected kind of seeing the transition and kind of process of seeing both of your companies really kind of niche into the coffee industry as your primary focus. So I would love to hear, because I feel like there is takeaways for that for a lot of industries, beyond just coffee specifically. Like what were the challenges of learning to kind of like niche down into just coffee specifically? And like what have you seen be more successful as a result of doing that?
Mm. Ultimately, it was a necessity of sales.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm just like, when we started the Levco, it was very difficult to determine who we serve and how we help people because there wasn't a strict like, we're an SEO firm or we're,
Hmm.
graphic design firm or we're a, web dev
Yeah.
or, we didn't have that. And that was the creation of that was intentional because I wanted it to be nimble enough that we could serve small, medium-sized businesses because truthfully, that's all I thought we could help at the time.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to have that ability to be nimble enough to where we could help a company that's doing 5-10 million a year
Hmm.
and not be so narrow that it's like, yeah, we can't work with you unless you're doing 50 to 100 million a year plus.
Yeah.
So when that was intentional, but then I realized I was like, this isn't very helpful for our audience because we don't have an audience because we don't have
Yeah.
anybody specifically that we're helping because we're helping anybody,
Hmm.
right? So if we're I'm not the first person to say this, but if we're not for a particular person, we're not for anybody.
Yeah.
And I was heavily, heavily influenced by David C. Baker and Blair
Hmm.
Inns
Yeah.
um, and their approach. And truthfully, I ripped off everything that they've done because I've seen the value in it.
Yeah.
You're smiling because I bet you've read some of their books.
I've listened to their podcast a lot more than I've read their books, but I
Yeah,
love it. There's every time I listen to one, I'm like, why don't I listen to this more? It's so helpful, so straightforward.
yeah,
It's really solid. Yeah.
yeah. So it was a necessity of sales really because I was just like, we're not. This isn't going to work if I don't find a type of client that we serve.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to niche so specifically into a particular kind of service because truthfully, I was scared that at some point that service would no longer be needed.
Yeah.
Um, so I wanted to serve a particular type of audience. And then for me with the Levco, I was like, well, who do I know best? And it's obviously coffee roasters.
Hmm.
And what ended up happening is our first client was a green coffee importer.
Yeah.
And we managed social media for them. We did some packaging design for them. We did a few little like sub brand projects for them. And we
Mm.
really just learned our process by working with them. And now that's almost exclusively who we work with is green coffee
Okay.
companies, growers, exporters, and importers.
Okay.
And so in tandem with the beginning of our business being we'll help anybody, and then our first client actually being a green coffee company, and then realizing that we need to determine who we actually serve.
Mm.
That was how we niched into specialty specifically, especially coffee, and then even more narrow um, into green coffee more specifically. So
Yeah.
that was the journey.
Yeah. What does green coffee mean? What does that look like?
Raw coffee, so it's before it's roasted. So every single little roasted bean that you get in your bag was actually two beans that were facing each other. And the thing that
Okay.
held those two beans together is what's called a coffee cherry, and that's what's grown off of a tree.
Okay.
And when we go to a coffee producing region, let's just say Colombia or Burundi or
Hmm.
uh, you know El Salvador, almost every single country in the world, there's no mechanical harvesting. Only like
Hmm.
Brazil and a few other places do mechanical harvesting. So every single cherry is handpicked,
Wow.
and then that cherry gets removed, that outer layer, and then you have those two seeds on the inside,
Hmm.
and then that is what's green coffee is those little seeds on the inside,
Okay.
and that gets processed, and then it gets dried and then shipped to a roaster, and then a
Yeah.
roaster takes those little green beans, puts them in a coffee roaster, and turns them brown, and then we can
Yeah.
have some delicious, delicious coffee.
That's cool that you guys are just have involvement and understanding, from the beginning and kind of through it. That's really
Mhm.
cool. What do you feel like? This has just been an interesting year for businesses overall, and I feel like we're kind of hearing that from our clients in a variety of industries. As you are helping, cafes, coffee companies, like what do you feel like are the consistent kind of challenges that you're hearing this year specifically, and some of those like conversations that you feel like you're kind of having maybe over and over again with different owners?
Mhm. I mean, for us, it's since it's an agricultural product that we work with. For us, there's a lot of conversation around the climate,
Yeah.
and I know we might get into political land if we start talking about climate change, but
Yeah,
the
that's okay.
reality is, you need. I'm going to steal this from one of our partners that we work with. Um, the way they were describing it was, you need sun, you need rain, you need
Mm,
air, you need soil to produce these crops, and when there's too much of any of those things,
yeah.
it becomes a stressful situation. And the reality is, however you're going to look at it, um, there's been a lot of challenging situations, specifically like in Papua New Guinea. There was a lot of rainfall and some landslides. Similar
Yeah.
situation in Burundi. A couple years ago, there was massive landslides in Honduras that just wipe out communities. So for us, because it's agricultural, a lot of the things that come up for us are, what's our part in that, and
Yeah.
how do we protect against that, and how do we plan for that in the future. Um,
Mm,
then on a more micro level, or I should say more specific to the United States and the business owners that I'm interacting with, there is a lot of loneliness
yeah.
in business, and I think it could be a result of the pandemic sort of causing us to be a little bit more isolated for a longer period of time and feeling like folks don't have our back. Um,
Mm,
but that's the I would say the big theme that I've picked up from business owners right now is like it's
mm.
very lonely. And Yeah, so those would be the two things that I hear most often.
Yeah, I would love to dig into both of those. So on the macro, talking about the climate challenges and just like these companies and growers kind of feeling these challenges. Like, what is the best way for a company to kind of like lead the charge or kind of make addressing or supporting kind of climate efforts like part of their business model? Like, what does that look like?
I mean, I'm not an agronomist, and I shouldn't speak for other folks'
For
businesses.
sure.
However, I think it begins in situations like this where we're having a conversation and it's very open, and the reality of the fact that this is people's lives. We
Yeah.
get to enjoy this coffee every single morning, or as a treat a couple times a week.
Yeah.
But this is folks' livelihoods, and if we're not conscious with how we're spending our dollars on this side of the supply circle,
Hmm.
then we can't lose sight of our place. And granted, I don't think that everybody needs to sell their car and ride a bicycle everywhere. And like
For
I don't
sure.
I don't think that. I think it's bigger than that. But it is important to have those conversations around what can we do,
Yeah.
and to understand, where does our food come from, where does our consumable products come from, and what is our place in supporting those folks so that they can keep making it. Because a big thing that we're talking about in coffee right now is our kids won't be able to afford coffee, if we don't make
Mm,
some real significant changes. Like, it'll be very expensive for them. It'll still exist, but it'll just
right.
be really, really expensive. And
Yeah.
so those are the types of questions that I think we need to be having, is what are bringing consumers into that conversation and helping them understand that, like, when you buy this coffee that is, let's say a 10-ounce bag is $27,
Yeah.
and it's on the shelf next to a coffee that's $12 for a 12-ounce bag.
Hmm.
What is happening here? And having that conversation around, like, the difference in impact in paying that $27 versus $12. What does that mean, not just for the roaster, but for everyone all the way back to the producer?
Yeah.
And So yeah, so those are that's how I would approach that conversation, is um, engaging consumers in the conversation around climate change.
Yeah. And how do we as consumers kind of look for those brands that we can support, or kind of to better understand the stories to know kind of where our dollars would make the biggest impact? Is there an easy way to do that, or is it just through conversation, you feel like? I mean,
It's
that's not to
tricky.
say that conversation is bad. I'm just
No,
curious.
no, it is. And this is whenever I have this conversation, this is what comes up is like, well, how do I know that
Mm,
I'm spending my
yeah.
money in a good place? And it is tricky. So what I always tell people is if there is no information about the producer themselves on the bag, probably not the best,
Yeah.
probably not somewhere you want to spend your money. Not always. There are
Right.
some companies that don't provide it's internally in the coffee industry we call it transparency,
Mm,
uh, or like having transparency information, or traceable information. Basically, all it's saying is where did this come from and who grew it.
yeah.
And what's becoming really popular now, or more popularized than it was even when I got into coffee industry about 8 years ago, is having actual transparency information on the bag about how much the producer was paid, all of the
Mm,
transport fees, and then all the way down to how much the roaster paid for that coffee.
yeah.
So if you are able to find that information on a bag, I'm going to feel a lot more safe and more comfortable that they're being conscious of where they're spending their money, how they're sourcing their coffee.
Yeah.
Um, that's a little bit more rare and difficult to find.
Yeah.
At the minimum, if there's information about who produced the coffee, where it was from, and maybe elevation and variety, we're getting to a good place. If they
Mm,
have that pricing information about how much the producer received, how much logistics costs, and all the way down to how much they paid per pound, now we're getting into a place that I feel really, really comfortable.
yeah. That makes a lot of sense. That's a good answer.
Yeah.
And those are good things to be looking out for. Okay, I want to circle back around to the loneliness thing that
Mm.
you said as well, kind of on the micro level. And maybe a better way to address this would even just be through your experience. Because I feel like that's always been kind of a thing of like entrepreneurship in general in some ways. But I do feel like contextualized in just like the last 3 to 5 years, it is a very kind of unique sort of moment for business owners and just people who are building brands. How do you feel like you have protected that against kind of that feeling of loneliness or kind of maintaining connection in your own business journey? What does that look like?
Well, I have a really good wife and life partner, uh, and she's been an amazing support to me.
Hmm.
I also I'm very lucky. I'm in therapy as well, and I think
Yeah.
that every business owner should be in therapy and at different junctures in their uh, career should be in some type of coaching.
Hmm.
And I'm not saying woo woo coaching. I'm just saying like folks that understand
Right.
who you are, where you're trying to go.
Yeah.
And so I would say those kind of three things would be um, having somebody that I get to share those struggles with and those lonely moments with, having a therapist to kind of work through those deeper feelings, because a lot of times the loneliness isn't necessarily about like, oh, I'm alone in this. It's more
Right.
so I am worried about the perception that other folks are going to have of me if I mess this up, if I break this, if I lose this account,
Yeah.
if I, and so that's where I think therapy kind of pulls those things together, because yes, it is lonely. If you're at the top of an organization, you've got a bunch of people below you, it is lonely,
Hmm.
but really what's going on there? And I think that's where the therapy connects all that. And then as it relates to coaching, I got coaching from this lady. She's amazing. Her name's Armandi Drew.
Hmm.
She's based out of Atlanta, but
Okay.
she's just phenomenal. And it wasn't the coaching that I received from her wasn't as much like here's how to do things, but more
Yeah.
discovery of what is the skeleton that you have, and what
Hmm.
are the bones that are missing.
Right.
How do we put some more structure in place for you as a person to be able to handle these, the things that you're facing. So that's how I've handled it. And I'm not going to say that I have got it figured out. I mean, I'm not going to even sit here and say that I like. this month I've had moments where I was just like, oh man, I feel pretty
Yeah.
crispy and pretty alone, and
Yeah.
maybe I should throw in the towel.
Yeah.
And I think that that's just a reality for. I don't think you own a business unless you're toying with that from time to time.
For sure.
So that's how I've handled it, though.
Yeah. How do you, and I love kind of both of those answers. And this wasn't even a road I was planning on going down in this episode, but that's
Let's go
okay.
down it.
I love it. Because I mean, I experienced that too, right? Where it's like you just have those, it's in seasons, right? You have like those seasons,
Yep.
and I mean, by season, I mean like it could be a span of 3 days, where
Yeah.
you're just like, I love everything about this business right now. And then you kind of like hit a season where you're like, honestly, like you're looking up jobs. You're like, what would
Let's
it
burn
be
it.
like
Yep.
if I just like was a marketing director somewhere? And you're just kind of like going in these seasons. And I feel like it is these very, it is cliche to talk about in a sense of like the highs and lows of business, but like when you're in it, it is very real because it's like it's overwhelming. But you're constantly thinking of all of the concerns of what could possibly happen in your business. And in a lot of ways, you are alone in that because the other,
Yeah.
and you don't want everybody in your business to be thinking about
Right.
those same things. So, I love that you mentioned therapy. That's something that's been very valuable to me as well. And coaching is something that I should leverage more personally than I do. But like in those moments where you are kind of like, I kind of feel like I could throw in the towel right now. Like, what are those messages that you tell yourself, or kind of those what do you kind of work through to navigate through those moments?
Yeah. I think it depends on how intense it is.
Yeah.
And for me, I need to talk it out in full with someone. So I also have a really dear friend that you may also know, Ethan Darla. He's a
Yeah.
brother to
Yeah.
me, and so we talk things out a lot as well. And I envision it as like a circle, and for me, I usually figure what is the actual issue that I'm like facing,
Hmm.
and then I go through this process of determining what are all these different outcomes, and then what's the worst thing that could happen, and what's the best possible situation, and then
Hmm.
coming into like closing that circle comes up to me being like, if nothing happens or all of this happens, I'm still going to be okay.
Yeah.
And this isn't the end of the world. This is just a
Hmm.
business. And
Right.
yes, there's people that are depending on it to pay their rent and to go on a vacation and to, you know, uh, buy a gift for their partner and to, what have you. But the reality is that this is not as serious as I'm feeling that it is right now.
Hmm.
Um, and yes, it if this thing that I'm feeling, or this, it's all gonna crumble tomorrow. If that is actually true, there's a bunch of complicated things that I'm gonna have to figure out.
Yeah.
But people do it every day,
Yep.
and it's not the other world. And
Hmm.
also, usually the place that I try to end up at is like trying to get myself to a place where I close that loop. And then once I've closed that loop, I try to move on to, okay, now what is the headspace that I need to be in to
Yeah.
do my job well and to show up for my team. And so usually once I've closed that loop, I usually am thinking specifically about my team and
Yeah.
how do I show up for them, and how do I make them feel like I've got their back no matter what,
Hmm.
and I'm going to come through for them.
Yeah.
And if I can get myself into that headspace, that loop, it's not that it doesn't matter, but that loop has been fully closed, and we can set it on the shelf, and that's where it exists. And usually
Yeah.
that thing is gone in a couple of days, right?
Exactly.
Uh,
Yeah.
you've never experienced any of this, have you?
No, not at all. But I love the I mean, that's just such a good cycle to go through. And what I love is that you end up in a place where something's going to happen and you can't control the outcome of necessarily everything that's going to happen. I mean, you can take steps in a certain direction to, try to move towards that preferred outcome. But I do love that you end in a place where you're like, I at least know that I can lead better today. Like I can
100%.
guide my team better. I can, show up for them better, and I can guide myself better because I feel grounded. I'm, taking this approach to understand like this is where we're trying to go. So I think that's a really healthy process to go to.
And at the end of all of this, what are we actually doing? Like the people are the ones that are going to be impacted. And
Yeah.
so if like we got to make sure that no matter what, we take care of our people. And as long as that's there,
Yeah.
then we're good. And
Yeah.
let the chips fall where they may, but make sure
Hmm.
that you get your head right to take care of your people well. Because I'm sure you've been in environments where ownership was, not in a good headspace and it rippled down
Hmm.
to you. It's awful. It's not fun. I've been there, and so I think that it's important for leaders to understand that that's actually your job. Your job isn't
Hmm.
to kill something and drag it back to cave. That's a role that you participate in. That's a thing that you function in. Your job is really to care for your team and to
Yeah.
give them a space for their becoming. And as long as we can close that loop and get there, that's all that we really need to be doing.
Hmm.
And the rest will take care of itself.
Yeah. I love that. I often think about that just for myself, like having 3 kids and I often find the tension of myself is like, this is again, it's like that classic struggle, but it's like so real in practice of like just learning that balance of like, there is the business side of me and the family side of me. And like you're saying, like those moments where I go into that negative headspace because of the pressures that I am, experiencing on the business side. Like it's so frustrating to me when I can identify that kind of trickling over to who I am as a dad or as a husband and, things like that. And so even just like learning to weigh those things differently of like, it's never worth it for stress over, work that we're doing for clients to affect my relationship with my kids or my relationship with my wife, things like that. But it's like in my head, especially as an Enneagram 3, I'm like achievement is everything, and I'm constantly trying to pursue like I have to be better,
Yeah,
even when nobody else is putting that pressure on me. And just learning
yeah.
to kind of flip that script has been a big thing for me
Mm,
too. Of just like it's okay, like I can put that in a box, and it doesn't have to
mhm,
be my everyday every moment kind of thing.
mm.
It has been valuable for me too.
So good.
Yeah. Okay, I want to zoom back out to a little bit more of the operation side
Sure.
of what you do. So you're doing a lot of coffee consulting, and I know that even the phrase I pulled that sentence that's like you're helping cafes go from being in the red to in the black.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, what do you feel like are the most common things that coffee companies have wrong?
Mm.
Typically when you first maybe start a consulting engagement that is affecting their profitability. Like what are those common
Hmm.
things, if there are any?
Yeah, there are. So when we begin an engagement, we go through a diagnostic assessment and this is true for both the Levco and for Pomelo, and we look at their entire business. And the I would say the two things that come up almost every time is they don't have a good grasp on their numbers. And what I mean by numbers is their unit economics for how
Hmm.
much it costs me to roast
Yep.
coffee, put it in a bag, put it on the shelf, and sell it.
Yep.
Like we understand that this coffee green costs us $6 a pound, and we roasted it, and it's $12 or 25 or however much. They don't
Yeah.
understand each of the like how much needs to be allocated for rent in that $25, how much needs to be allocated for.
Hmm.
So they don't understand their numbers very well. They understand it. They're not enmeshed in them.
Yeah.
The second thing that I would say is they're so busy that they lose sight of their most important thing that they're doing, i.e., building their business and running their business. They're so enmeshed in like, oh, I got to get coffee out the door, or I've got to, respond to these emails or whatever it
Hmm.
is. They forget that, oh, my job is actually to make this thing run better and make
Yeah.
this thing function well. So that always comes up and it's usually during the diagnostic. One of the things we ask is, how do you approach sales and what are your marketing efforts? And it's usually like you can feel the room like get colder.
Yeah.
like they like
Like,
they
why are you
like
talking
freak
about
out.
us like such? Why are you talking about such like boring things? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And you're like, oh, wow, I think this is very important. Um, so that's usually what happens is there's a realization for them that like, oh, yeah, I don't have as tight of a grasp on this as I need to, and I know that I do. Like deep down, they know it.
Yeah.
They're not the folks that we work with are awesome. They're not
Mhm.
dumb. They're not. They're well educated. They're smart people. They have massive hearts, but oftentimes those structural pieces are just missing. And
Yeah.
at the beginning of engagement, we're like kind of pushing there and finding that those are usually what's missing from folks, specifically in coffee.
Yeah. Do you find that the end result is kind of adjusting and this is probably different contextually. So wherever you take this is great, but like, is the end result typically just affecting that final cost that you're selling the product for, or is it typically like trimming down costs in along their process to kind of make their price make more sense, I suppose?
Typically, they're not charging enough. So
Yeah.
typically, and I'm not sitting over here saying, oh, just raise your prices, everything will be better, because it won't.
Yeah.
But so there is an element of you do have to be cognizant of how you're raising prices. But typically, folks are not charging enough for what they're selling. And this
Mhm.
is I'm specifically talking about coffee roasters right now,
Yeah.
in my work with Pomelo. Um, Typically, they don't charge enough, and then oftentimes there's a lot of areas that they are leaving money on the table. Like for
Mm.
instance, delivery. A lot of folks do free delivery, and the reality
Interesting.
is that nobody needs to be doing free delivery.
Yeah.
But this Amazon has trained us that, well, I should just
Right.
let's just include it.
Yeah.
But it costs you money. You have wear and tear on your vehicle. You have your
Mhm.
time for your delivery driver, and you have gas, which is also a significant expense there. So usually they're not charging enough, and then there's these operational things that they're leaving money on the table, and it's kind of bleeding them. So all of the profit they're making from this $27 coffee gets bled out from some of these other things like free delivery, or maybe they don't have a good onboarding process or a good way of closing sales, or maybe their salesperson is not very effective, which we've
Mhm.
come across quite a bit. So that's usually what we end up finding with folks in coffee.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, I have two more questions for you. First one here is, so one of the things that I also have loved about watching you grow your business is, and you've been doing it a little bit less recently, but every once in a while you still will. You post like personal content of you kind of like walking through a business topic, advice for coffee roasters, cafes, things like that. And I just love, I have personally loved seeing like how similar kind of you and I approach content, of it just being like, I'm just going to sit in front of my phone. I'm
Yeah,
going to talk about a topic. It's going to be very low
yeah,
production. I'm going to
yeah,
be more slow paced than I should be. Like
yeah.
from typical kind of like marketing advice.
Right.
And I just have loved seeing that. How do you feel like you have, and maybe it hasn't been a process, but like what has kind of been the process of you getting comfortable with, creating your own content and just like being authentically you in how you share your advice and value?
I'm figuring it out still, to be honest with you. And I think you said that, oh, you haven't posted very much recently, and that is true. I think it's been difficult for me to find my footing in terms of what kind of content am I actually good at making and actually is connecting with people. So for part of the reason why you haven't seen me recently is because I was just realizing that I don't know that I'm the video guy. I don't know.
Mm,
I'm not the Gary V that's going to be, throwing up a video every 5 minutes.
yeah.
And so there's that. There's also another element too, that because I run an agency, there is an amount of cognizance that I have to be around the production quality that like
Yeah.
I made a decision a few probably like 9 months ago where I was like, we're not going to do anything that I'm not proud of. Doesn't mean
Mm.
everything's going to be like,
Yep.
on a fancy
Perfect.
camera
Yeah.
and, send it through rounds and rounds of edit. Like that doesn't mean that, but it just means that I want to be proud of what we put out.
Yeah.
So there has to be a reason for something being a little more raw, a little more gritty. And what I have come to is that my writing is where that starts to kind of settle in. I'm
Hmm.
super happy with being really vulnerable, really honest in my writing. And I
Yeah.
found that folks connect with that mostly on LinkedIn. Um, so it's been a process for me to determine what am I willing to share and how am I willing to share it? Because I also don't want to just regurgitate things that other people are saying. I want to
Yeah.
put something out there that's helpful to folks, that connects with people, and that's honest. A big part of both of uh, our both of my brands is that we're like we want to be honest, honest to a fault, and so that's really kind of why I've slowed down a little bit. It didn't feel as honest to me to be posting videos in that way, but it has felt honest to write and post on LinkedIn, just copy. And so I don't know if I answered your question, but that's
No.
where I'm at the moment on that topic.
Yeah, I think that is like that's your journey of self-discovery, right? Like you are, you started out with those videos of like recognizing this doesn't feel as authentic to me as,
Yeah.
what I feel most comfortable kind of presenting and what like represents me the best. So I love that led you to like, okay, we can stop doing that and we can do something else. We're not going to stop creating content. We're just going to
No,
do it in a different way. And I know your team helps you with content as well for, the actual like
I
accounts for,
I would not exist without my team. That's
yeah.
that's like we have to be very clear about this, that my team makes me look so good.
Yeah.
And both Amelia and Maria and Chloe and Clay, they all just do such a good job at making us look good. And I think that that's also another piece of it too, of like I want them to be proud of what we put out,
Yep.
and that has changed because the team has gotten larger. It's like, okay,
Yep.
I need to be really, really, I want them to be proud of what they're putting out too. So yeah.
Yeah. I love that. Okay. So you have business owners and marketing leaders who are listening to this show. What is one
Okay.
last piece of advice or encouragement you would like to leave with the people listening today?
At the beginning, middle, and end of the day, you're a human, and to not lose sight of that in the day-to-day grind and the day-to-day push of my business needs to do this for me to make this.
Hmm.
We have to bring in this number of accounts to, you know, get our folks insurance, or we have to, do this in order for me to have another kid or whatever that is. Beginning, middle, and end of the day, you're a human, and not to lose sight of that in the process, because that is all we really are. And
Mm-hmm.
so don't forget that, and enjoy the process.
I love that. Right on brand with the Marketing Should Be Fun show, I should add as well. So
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Luke, it's been so fun. I will put the links to both Pomelo Coffee Consulting and the Levco in the description of this podcast for all of those who are listening and want to learn more. But thank you so much for just taking your time to come hang out today. It was fun.
A real treat, and it's been wonderful seeing your journey, and I appreciate the work that you're doing, and I thank you for inviting me on today. Cheers.
Yeah, right back at you. Thanks.